So this class is designed to give you the basics so that you can paint independently with pastel. So I'm going to show you how to use pastel, how to build colors on a surface, how to mix, how to apply, how to have some fun with pastel. Now, when I say values, I'm talking about the gradations from light to dark. The darkest dark to the lightest light by making a line straight across the top of the page and then divide this line into 5 boxes. For this exercise, you'll need a white pastel and a black pastel. Now start off with the black pastel in the 5th box and layer. You'll probably still see some paper showing through, so turn your hand and layer another way. This is called cross hatching, and when you do that, it makes the dark intensely dark. So this is the darkest dark you can get. We're just gonna scumble, which means you use the side of the pastel and you drag it on the paper. So I'm not putting a huge amount of pastel on the paper, just a bit right there. Next, on the 3, we're going to scumble again, and it's just a little bit of pastel right in the middle. Now, when you're painting with pastel, you layer colors one on top of the other. So you don't mix it on a palette and then apply it with a brush. You mix it right on the paper. So now we're going to pick up the white pastel, and in the white box, put a little pastel. You may not even see it if you're using white paper. Now scumble the white pastel on top of the 3. When you scumble, you drag one color on top of another. Scumbling is such an unlovely word, but that's technically what the term is in pastel. So you scumble by pulling one color on top of another. Now you'll notice that the white pastel has a little bit of dark on it now. Use that same side and put it on the 2. If nothing comes off, that's okay. We'll work with it. In pastel, these are your paint brushes. The good thing about them is you never lose them. And if you get good at using your fingers as brushes, you begin to know where each color is. So I'll keep white on this finger, black on this finger, and so forth. So get in the habit of knowing what color is on what brush. So I'm going to start off with this brush, and I'm going to go to the 4 and blend it in. When you blend, you push the pastel into the tooth of the paper. That makes it cover a little more. So your 4 may look darker after you blend. It also puts pastel on your finger. So now your finger or your brush is loaded up with pigment. So take this pigment to the 3 and blend it. Notice when you blend, the black and the white combine. And now you have this beautiful mid-tone gray. You also have that same mid-tone gray on your paintbrush. So take that paintbrush to the 2 and blend it a little. So if everything went as planned, you now have 5 values from dark to light. If one of yours is a little darker than it should be, you can adjust it by putting some white pastel on top of it or adding a little more dark. But you should see a clear difference between each of these values, so that 1 is your lightest light, 5 is your darkest dark. So starting off, look at this still life. Where do you see something that's as dark as the 5 value? You can unmute and chime in.
In the shadow.
Shadow.
Yes.
Yeah, the shadow, and also on the apple.
You mean here?
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty dark. But technically, this is the darkest dark.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That would be called the crest shadow. So number 5 on our list up here is cast shadow. Cast.
Number 5?
Yes.
Or
number
4?
5. 5 is cast shadow. So jot that in and I'll show you what I mean. So this is the cast shadow. Not here. This is also a cast shadow, but it's not as dark as it is right underneath the apple. Where the object sits is the cast shadow. So this is the darkest dark. Now, as the shadow moves away from an object, it becomes lighter and diffused. So that's why you see a lighter shadow further away from the apple. Now, this is also a dark, but it's 1 step lighter than the cast shadow right here. So this would be called the crest shadow. Crest shadow, and that's number 4. So on number 4, we're going to write crest shadow. Now, number 3 is considered local color. So local color would be on either side of the crest shadow. So that's the color of the apple that isn't in light, like up here, and isn't in darkness, like here. So that's the overall color. We know it's a green apple. So the green of that apple would be the local color. So local color is 3. Okay. Now the next value is one that you have to be taught to see. Just like the crest shadow, it's not something that you normally would notice. It's reflected light. Reflected light is the light that's bouncing off of this tabletop and onto the bottom of the apple. And you can see it as a line of light right here. It may become more clear if I take it away.
Can you show us the still life?
Oh, I guess that would help, wouldn't it? Okay, so this is with the light taken away. This is with the light. So you can see the reflected light right here. Let me show you that again. That's if the light gets taken away. And that's reflected light. So reflected light is light that bounces up from the tabletop onto the bottom of the still life. So on our sheet, we're going to put reflected light. And then the last is the intense highlight. So the lightest light is where you see the shiny white spots on the apple. So those are, and even here, those shiny white spots are considered the highlight. Highlight is a 1. So here is the highlight. Now take a moment and lightly sketch the shape of the apple. When I say lightly, I mean nothing more than just the basic shape and then the shape of the shadow, the cast shadow right underneath it. So something about like that. I'm going to spotlight the apple so you can see it more clearly and take 2 minutes at the most. Move it over some. So at this point, we should all have a very simple sketch. Now, this is just a very basic outline, nothing too detailed. Now, the first thing we're going to do is put in the cast shadow, the darkest dark. In pastel, you work from dark to light. So you have to get into the habit of going dark to light. Now, the darkest dark, or the 5 value, is right on the bottom. So right where the apple makes contact with the surface underneath it. So I'm going to spotlight the apple, and you have a minute to get that cast shadow. Remember that it's darkest right underneath the apple, and then as the shadow moves away from the apple, it does get a little bit lighter. Now, once you have that dark line right under the apple, so this is really the 5, the darkest dark, then we're going to move to the 4 value. The 4 is the crest shadow. So again, that crest shadow is the shadow that wraps around the center part. You'll see it all the way up here, and it wraps around right in the middle like a belt. The crest shadow is almost always opposite the light source. So if the light is coming from this angle and hitting it here, then this is where the cast shadow is underneath, and the crest shadow is in the middle. So the way to capture that is we're going to make a little belt of dark right through the middle, and I'm scumbling, again, scumbling with the pastel on the side. Like so. It doesn't have to have such a sharp edge on it the way I did it. And there's your apple. So you're scumbling right through the middle. Don't try to get the bruise. Just ignore the bruise. You are using your 4, you might as well put in the stem. The stem is also a 4. And you'll notice that on top of the apple, there's another crest shadow, and that's the rounded part of that funnel shape by the stem. So put the darks in for both. So at this point, you have a band of 4, and you have the little stem and the concave area. Next, we're moving to the 3. The 3 is local color. So we're using black and white. Local color on this apple is going to be the areas right next to the dark. So it's all around here, and it's everything that isn't the green. So the way to do that is I'm going to take the white, go right beside it, and I'm overlapping some of the black. Now I've put a layer of pastel down, and I'm going to rub and load up my paintbrush with some of that pastel. So now I have some of the dark on my finger, and that will let me make the 3 right next to the 4. This is sort of like finger painting for adults. You get your hands dirty, you get to push the pastel around. It's a lot of fun. We'll do the same thing on the bottom. So jump in there, use your finger, push that pastel around, and show it who's boss. All right, so once you have the 3s, then we're going to move to the 2s. The 2.
I have a question. I think I have gotten way lots of black on all of my fingers. And so now all my colors are awfully dark. Surprise.
Okay. Occupational hazard.
What would you do if that happened to you?
I keep a towel on my lap, or I wear an apron, and I will wipe off my fingers as I go. Other artists keep some baby wipes handy, and that way they can clean their fingers if they need to be. Don't be afraid to get up and go wash your hands at any point if you need to. Also, get in the habit of limiting the dark to just one finger. So that way you don't wind up polluting all your brushes. I know it's hard to do. All right, everybody caught up? Good. So we're moving to the 2. Now the 2 is reflected light, and that's the light that's bouncing up onto the underside of the apple. You may have already painted that by doing the rubbing like we just did. I'm going to go ahead and take some of that same dust and cover the whole shape of the apple. So the rest of the apple is also a 2. It's a lighter value, and that's up around the top. And I want to have some pastel there so that when I put the highlights on, they show. So that's why I went ahead and touched it, and that's why it's good to leave the dust until you reach this point. Next, I'm going to take an eraser. This is a clean pink eraser. Pastel is different than graphite. So a pink eraser or a plastic eraser works best in lifting up pastel. If you use any other kind of eraser, it acts like a blender. So I'm going to use this eraser to sharpen the edge. So I'm just erasing where I got a little overzealous and I painted outside the lines. This also helps me to shape the cast shadow, get rid of any pencil marks. And it helps me to lighten in places. So if I want to show where the edge of that top part is on the apple, I can do it with the eraser. Okay, next, I'm going to start adding some of the twos in the apple. So here you see this whole part of the apple is a 2. The top part of the apple is a 2. The only thing that's left after this step is going to be the shiny spot. So we want to make sure we have everything covered on the paper. So here on my paper, I'm going to use the eraser to make this a little stronger. I'm lifting up some of that pastel, and I'm making a shiny spot on the bottom. If you blow the pastel, try not to inhale. You don't want to breathe in that pastel. It's better to work flat and then tap it. Okay, so I'm going to focus on the still life for you, and you can go ahead and erase out your twos and show the reflected light. Now the ones are the shiny spots that you see, the really intense highlights like here, even here, here. So for that, I'm using white pastel and I'm adding it and I'm making them kind of chunky so that they look pretty strong. And that will help show off some of the texture and the light. So you're adding white, and I'll spotlight the apple so you can see. You want to just add white where you see the lightest lights.